Welcome, friends, to another Wolff Responds. I want to talk to you today about deporting millions of immigrants, documented or otherwise, here from the United States, probably to Mexico or elsewhere in Central America. Yes, I know it's been in the news. Yes, I know you may have been becoming tired of hearing about it. But it is a very important phenomena. And I'm not talking about what it means to the poor people who get deported, losing their jobs, losing their homes, being thrown into situations from which, in many cases, they fled, only now they're being forcibly returned. And I mean forcibly. So I want to talk not about all of that. You know that. I want to talk about the economics. What does it mean for and to the American economy that millions of people are about to be or trying to be deported? The Trump program. Okay, here we go. Like most such questions, they're best answered by looking at the history. In this case, we have the rich history of the United States as a nation of immigrants. Now, you've heard that before, but let's look into what that means. Over the last 2 centuries and earlier, Europeans mostly, plus Black Africans involuntarily, were brought to the United States. I'm going to focus my attention now on the whites, the Europeans who came. Wave after wave, the British, the Irish, the Germans, the Italians, the Scandinavians, the Russians, the Jews, on and on. What was the economics of that? Well, we know why they came, because the economic conditions in Europe were going through a turmoil. The collapse of feudalism in the early days, the transition in Europe from feudalism to capitalism was monumentally disruptive of people's lives. The serfs of feudalism, when that system ended, became the desperate people looking for work by being hired out to a capitalist. And there were often many more looking than there were capitalists hiring. That's the story of why they came to the United States in significant numbers. And then in the subsequent centuries, mostly the 19th and at least a large part of the 20th, wave after wave came to the United States to escape inequality, poverty, violence built on inequality and poverty in Europe that they could come to here. And the American capitalist economy was strong enough to absorb them, to say, yes, indeed, come, often to recruit them actively. And when they got here, they were given various kinds of help. In some cases, hundreds of acres of land taken from the indigenous people and given as a subsidy to the arriving European peasants and farmers. In other words, American capitalism found a place for these people. Yes, the place initially was not very attractive. The immigrants got, the lowest paid jobs and the worst housing and the poorest schools and all the rest. just as the liberated blacks after the Civil War in the North got. But I want to remind people how the economics worked. By putting the immigrant at the bottom of the economic pile, it allowed everybody else a step up. The poor white immigrant from Europe, and this is partially a story of racism interwoven, and classism and all the rest. Employers would hire the white because they could get the work done by underpaid black people or underpaid latest immigrant wave. And so the system benefited. It was strong enough to benefit from the immigrant. Let me remind everyone of another aspect of the economics of immigration. The immigrant is mostly a working age adult. Yes, some children come, and yes, some elderly come, but they're not the major people. Their very childhood and their very elderliness make them more likely to stay back home. So the immigrants who come are working age adults. They get off the boat and they go to work. That's how they survive. They take whatever job they can, and they get the poorest jobs and the worst housing and so on. But notice what this means. Every working age adult in any economy has already had invested in them the resources of society. Someone had to feed that baby after it was born and clothe it and shelter it. Then they had to be educated in a public or other school of some kind. Lots of costs to bring a person to the stage in their physical and mental development when they can be good, productive workers. The immigrant costs that to the country from which they run away. It was Italy or Ireland or Britain or France or Germany who paid the costs of developing an adult worker who then left and went to the United States. The cost of that worker was borne by the country they left. The benefit, the productivity of that worker was achieved by the society able and strong enough to absorb them. And that was the United States. In a very literal, clear way, immigrants were what made America great. And what is going to undo America's greatness is the failure to absorb immigrants now. Yeah, it's exactly the opposite of the noise from Trump. America first would mean absorb the immigrants, take advantage of their productivity, because their countries of origin spent the money to make them adult workers. Those countries, without intending it, were subsidizing American capitalist growth. When Mr. Trump cuts that off, if he does, if he goes through with the deportation of millions of undocumented and maybe now documented immigrants, that's not a sign of America first. That's a sign of the weakness of the American economy. It can't absorb anymore. It no longer has the flexibility or the capability of bringing in waves of immigrants, putting them at the bottom of the economic pyramid so they can boost everybody else while waiting for the next wave to boost them. We can't do it anymore. The American capitalist system has no place. Increasingly, if it brings in an immigrant, that is to replace a higher paid native born. And that's a recipe for conflict and horror that we have seen. But that's not a sign of now we're going to put America first. You know what that reminds me of? Somebody who can no longer afford hamburger and who therefore switches from hamburger to Hamburger Helper, which is just grain, not meat. And when you speak to that person, they, however, can't admit because they're ashamed. They shouldn't be, but they're ashamed that they can't afford hamburger. And when you notice the box of Hamburger Helper on their table and you ask about it, they turn to you, surprised that you don't know, and they tell you about how it's dietetic to eat the Hamburger Helper. They're doing it to improve their diet. You know, you feel bad for a person like that. They'd be better off if honestly they faced what the issue was. Sure, if you prefer Hamburger Helper for your diet, do it. But don't fool yourself. Don't make empty, lame efforts to fool others by making up BS. Mr. Trump doesn't dare be the politician any more than Mr. Biden or Kamala Harris were, to be honest with the American people and talk about why the capitalist system is in trouble, why it can't anymore do what it used to when it was really growing, namely absorb and take advantage of immigrants, grab onto the subsidy they represent. The America that throws those people out is a weak economic situation. And it isn't going to be fooling for very long when it does it all around America first. That's right up there with thinking that you've switched to Hamburger Helper because of your diet. We ought to be honest with ourselves. But of course, we would need a whole new generation of politicians and talk about the weakness of the economy. Talk about why we can't provide work to immigrants the way we once did without threatening the people already here. This is a crucial marker of the weakness here. It could be a learning experience. It could be a wake-up call. But it won't be if we have nothing but politicians who rebrand this weakness as if it were, joke upon joke, a sign of American strength. America first. Don't be fooled. It will cost us all dearly. If interventions like this strike you as useful parts of the national conversation, ways of thinking about urgent problems that would make us better off, no matter how we interact with these views and those views, well, then support us, please. And by that, I mean mostly share this video with friends, neighbors, family. That's why we make them. And yes, of course, we need money to do it. And if you can help with that, it will be enormously appreciated. Thank you.